Every Wild West legend explained in 27 minutes. Have you ever wondered what it really took to survive the Wild West? Was it faster guns, sharper wits, or just pure luck? In this video, we'll uncover the untold stories of outlaws who became heroes, lawmen who turned into legends, and showmen who transformed the frontier into myth. From Billy the Kid's daring escapes to Jesse James' final betrayal, from Wyatt Earp's stand at the OK Corral to Buffalo Bill's world stage, each story holds a mystery you've never heard. But which of these legends was truly the most dangerous, and which was more myth than man? Stick around, because by the end, you just might see the Wild West in a whole new way. Wild Bill Hickok. Have you ever heard of a man who could shoot with either hand, hit his mark every time, and still charm a crowd with stories at the poker table? That was James Butler Hickok, better known as Wild Bill Hickok. He wasn't just a gunfighter. He was a gambler, a scout, and for a time, a lawman. Born in Illinois in 1837, Hickok first gained fame during the Civil War as a Union scout and spy. His reputation grew after tales spread of his deadly shootouts. One famous account told how he killed several men in Springfield, Missouri, with his Colt revolvers drawn lightning fast. Stories like this spread far and wide, making him one of the first true Wild West celebrities. But Wild Bill wasn't just about gunfights. He worked as a U.S. Marshal in Kansas, trying to bring law to dangerous towns filled with outlaws and drifters. He was known for his strict sense of justice, but also for his calm, almost theatrical style. Some say his presence alone could quiet a saloon full of rowdy cowboys. Hickok's end came as dramatically as his life. In 1876, while playing poker in Deadwood, South Dakota, he was shot from behind by Jack McCall. At that moment, Hickok held 2 black aces and 2 black eights, the so-called dead man's hand. It became legend overnight. Why does Wild Bill Hickok still matter today? Maybe because he wasn't just a gunfighter. He was part myth, part man. His life blended courage, danger, and showmanship in a way that captured the spirit of the West. Billy the Kid. Now imagine a teenager who could outshoot grown men, slip away from jails, and leave sheriffs frustrated in his dust. That was Henry McCarty, better known as Billy the Kid. Born in 1859 in New York, Billy's early years were rough. His mother died when he was young, and by his teens, he was drifting in New Mexico. He fell into cattle rustling and petty theft, but it was his quick temper and faster draw that made him infamous. Billy the Kid is remembered as both a ruthless outlaw and a misunderstood youth. Some say he killed 21 men, one for each year of his short life. Others argue the number was far less. Still, his legend grew with each escape. He once broke out of jail in Lincoln, New Mexico, by killing 2 deputies and slipping away with their weapons. People marveled at his boldness. The Lincoln County War made him famous. He took sides in the bloody feud between cattle ranchers and business rivals, where lawmen and outlaws were hard to tell apart. His role turned him into a symbol of rebellion against authority. Billy's life ended when Sheriff Pat Garrett tracked him down in 1881 and shot him at Fort Sumner. He was only 21, yet his story didn't end there. Rumors spread that he survived, with men claiming to be the Kid appearing decades later. Whether true or not, the mystery only fed the legend. What made Billy so fascinating? Perhaps it was the mix of youth, defiance, and tragedy. He lived fast, died young, and became the eternal outlaw hero of the Old West. Jesse James. Picture a man seen as both a criminal and a folk hero, robbing banks and trains while winning the admiration of those who hated the railroads and big business. That was Jesse James. Born in Missouri in 1847, Jesse grew up during the Civil War. As a teenager, he joined Confederate guerrilla fighters, riding with bloody bands that attacked Union supporters. That taste for violence never left him. After the war, Jesse and his brother Frank formed the James Younger Gang, launching daring robberies across the Midwest. Their targets were often banks, stagecoaches, and railroads. To some, Jesse was nothing more than a cold-blooded killer. To others, he was a Robin Hood figure striking back against powerful corporations. The truth? He kept the money, but his charisma and bold style made him a legend. Newspapers of the day played a big role in shaping his myth. Reporters painted him as a rebel hero standing up for the common man. That image stuck, even though Jesse was responsible for deaths during his heists. For over a decade, Jesse James evaded capture. Lawmen and bounty hunters failed again and again. But betrayal came from within. In 1882, Robert Ford, a member of his own gang, shot him in the back while Jesse was adjusting a picture on the wall of his home. His death shocked the nation. Some mourned, others cheered, but all agreed Jesse James had become more than just a man. He was a symbol of defiance, a name that would echo in dime novels, ballads, and movies for generations. Why does Jesse James still fascinate us? Maybe because he stood at the crossroads of outlaw crime and folk hero myth, blurring the line between villain and legend. Wyatt Earp. What makes a man remembered more as a legend than as a lawman? That's the case with Wyatt Earp, a figure tied forever to the gunfight at the OK Corral. Born in Illinois in 1848, Earp spent his early years drifting between jobs, from stagecoach driver to buffalo hunter. Eventually, he turned to law enforcement, taking on the role of deputy sheriff in rough frontier towns. His reputation was built not only on his quick draw, but also on his cool temper. Unlike many hot-headed gunmen, Wyatt often avoided pulling the trigger unless it was the only way. But it was in Tombstone, Arizona, that his story became legend. In 1881, a feud boiled between the Earp brothers and a gang known as the Cowboys. Tensions exploded into a 30-second gunfight behind the OK Corral. Wyatt, along with his brothers Virgil and Morgan, and their ally Doc Holliday, stood against the outlaws. When the smoke cleared, 3 cowboys lay dead, and the Earps became heroes in the eyes of many. Yet fame came with trouble. Soon after, Virgil was ambushed, and Morgan was killed. Wyatt answered with what became known as the Earp Vendetta Ride, hunting down those he held responsible. By then, his name carried both respect and fear. After Tombstone, Earp moved on, living in places like Colorado and California. He even worked as a boxing referee and dabbled in business. When he died in 1929, he had outlived most of his peers, and Hollywood soon picked up his story, turning him into the face of frontier justice. Why does Wyatt Earp's legend endure? Because he embodied the balance of law and grit, a man who stood tall when lawlessness ruled, leaving behind a tale of justice that still captivates us today. Doc Holliday. Can a sickly gambler with failing lungs become one of the most feared gunmen of the West? That unlikely story belongs to John Henry Doc Holliday. Born in Georgia in 1851, Holliday trained as a dentist, which earned him his nickname. But his life changed when he was diagnosed with tuberculosis. Told he didn't have long to live, he left for the dry air of the frontier, hoping it would ease his illness. What he found instead was a new life of cards, saloons, and violence. Doc quickly became known as a skilled gambler and a man with a short fuse. He was sharp with both wit and pistol. Despite his illness, he carried himself with a deadly confidence. Friends respected him, enemies feared him. His loyalty was unmatched, and that loyalty drew him into the orbit of Wyatt Earp. Holliday's most famous moment came alongside the Earps at the OK Corral. Though coughing blood between breaths, he stood shoulder to shoulder with Wyatt, firing at the cowboys in the dusty lot. Witnesses later swore it was Holliday's presence that tipped the scales, his deadly aim adding to the Earps' victory. Beyond gunfights, his life was marked by gambling halls, whiskey, and constant travel. Yet even as his body weakened, his reputation only grew. He became known as a man who never backed down, even when death was certain. In 1887, Doc Holliday died in a Colorado hotel, far from the saloons and shootouts that made his name. His last words, it is said, were a wry joke at his own fate. Why does his story still echo today? Because Doc Holliday showed that courage isn't about health or strength, it's about grit. His legend reminds us that even the weakest body can hold the strongest will. Buffalo Bill Cody. What if the Wild West itself could be bottled up and sold as a show? That's exactly what William Frederick Buffalo Bill Cody managed to do. Born in 1846 in Iowa, Cody's youth was a blend of frontier work. He herded cattle, trapped beaver, and rode for the Pony Express. During the Civil War, he served as a scout and later worked hunting buffalo to feed railroad workers. In fact, that's how he earned the nickname Buffalo Bill. But Cody's true genius was in storytelling. He realized people back east and even in Europe craved tales of the West, its outlaws, cowboys, and Indians. So in 1883, he launched Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. It wasn't just entertainment, it was spectacle. Cowboys rode bucking broncos, native warriors performed battles, and sharpshooters like Annie Oakley amazed crowds with trick shots. The show traveled the world, giving audiences in New York, London, and Paris a taste of frontier life. Some say Cody shaped how the entire world came to imagine the West. Was it always accurate? Not quite. His shows mixed fact with legend, but the effect was powerful. He turned the cowboy into a symbol of freedom and adventure. Buffalo Bill also crossed paths with real history. His shows featured Sitting Bull, the Lakota leader who had defeated Custer at Little Bighorn. This blending of real figures with stage drama gave Cody's productions both credibility and flair. He remained a larger-than-life figure until his death in 1917. Even today, Buffalo Bill represents not just a man, but the myth of the Wild West itself. Why does his name live on? Because he proved that the West wasn't just lived. It was performed, remembered, and immortalized for generations to come. Calamity Jane. How does a poor orphan girl grow up to become one of the toughest frontierswomen in history? That's the story of Martha Jane Canary, better known as Calamity Jane. Born in Missouri in 1852, Jane faced hardship early. Her parents died when she was young, leaving her to care for her younger siblings. She turned to odd jobs, anything to survive, from dishwasher to nurse to ox team driver. But it was her fearless spirit that set her apart. She could ride, shoot, and curse as well as any man on the frontier. Her nickname, Calamity Jane, came from her daring rescues and wild temper. She claimed to have earned it while serving as a scout during the Indian Wars, where she supposedly saved soldiers from ambushes. Whether every tale was true or not, Jane knew how to spin a story, and people listened. Calamity Jane became linked with another frontier legend, Wild Bill Hickok. She often claimed they were lovers, though historians doubt it. Still, her devotion to him was clear. After his death in Deadwood, she lived much of her life in that rough mining town, nursing the sick and poor whenever needed. Beneath the whiskey and wild reputation, she had a compassionate side. Her fame grew as part of Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, where she entertained crowds with her sharp shooting and larger-than-life personality. Yet she was also known for heavy drinking and a rowdy lifestyle that sometimes overshadowed her courage. Jane died in 1903, reportedly penniless, and was buried next to Hickok in Deadwood. Some say she asked for it, hoping their names would remain side by side forever. Why does Calamity Jane endure as a legend? Because she broke every rule of her time. She wasn't polished or proper, but she lived on her own terms, proving the frontier wasn't just for men. Butch Cassidy. Could an outlaw lead a gang and still be remembered with a smile? That's the paradox of Robert Leroy Parker, better known as Butch Cassidy. Born in Utah in 1866, Parker grew up in a Mormon family. As a teenager, he worked on ranches, where he picked up both cowboy skills and a taste for mischief. He eventually turned to crime, but unlike many cutthroat outlaws, he carried himself with charm and wit. His easygoing nature made him likable, even when he was robbing banks. Butch's true fame came as the leader of the Wild Bunch, a gang that included the Sundance Kid. Together, they staged some of the most daring robberies of the 1890s. Banks, trains, and payroll shipments all fell victim. What set them apart was their careful planning. They often avoided bloodshed, preferring brains over bullets. Lawmen across the West tried to catch him, but Butch stayed one step ahead. His gang used fresh horses at hidden stations to outrun posses, a clever tactic that frustrated sheriffs time and again. To ordinary folks, this made him something of a folk hero. By the early 1900s, with pressure mounting, Butch and Sundance fled to South America. There, they continued their outlaw ways, robbing banks in Bolivia and Argentina. But their story ended in 1908, when Bolivian soldiers cornered them after a payroll heist. Reports say they went down in a blazing gunfight, choosing death over capture. Still, legends persist that Butch survived and returned quietly to the U.S. Some even claim he lived out his days in Utah under a false name. True or not, it only deepened his myth. Why is Butch Cassidy remembered so fondly? Because he wasn't the cruel outlaw type. He was clever, funny, and bold, making him less villain and more rogue in the eyes of history. The Sundance Kid. What happens when the best gun hand in the West meets the most charming outlaw leader? That's the story of Harry Longabout, better known as the Sundance Kid. Born in Pennsylvania in 1867, Longabaugh drifted west as a teenager, seeking work and adventure. He got his nickname Sundance Kid after serving time in Sundance, Wyoming, for horse theft. By the time he crossed paths with Butch Cassidy, he had already proven himself as a skilled rider and an even deadlier shot. With Butch as the brains and Sundance as the quick hand, they made a near-perfect team. As part of the Wild Bunch, Sundance became infamous for his cool under pressure. During train robberies, witnesses often recalled his calm voice, giving orders with deadly precision. He wasn't flashy, but when it came to handling a revolver, few could match him. Sundance was also known for his loyalty to Etta Place, a woman who traveled with him and Butch in South America. Their relationship added a human side to his legend, showing him as more than just an outlaw. Like Butch, Sundance followed the trail to Bolivia, where their final chapter played out. In 1908, cornered after a robbery, the pair were said to have fought to the last bullet before dying in a shootout with soldiers. Yet, just like Butch, rumors swirled that Sundance survived and slipped back into the shadows of the U.S. The enduring myth of the Sundance Kid owes much to the partnership with Butch Cassidy. They weren't just criminals, they were legends of loyalty, daring, and freedom. Together, they symbolized the last breath of the Old West before modern times closed the frontier. Why does Sundance still captivate us? Because he was the perfect outlaw sidekick, deadly, loyal, and unforgettable. Pat Garrett. Can a lawman become just as famous as the outlaw he hunted? That's the legacy of Pat Garrett, the sheriff who brought down Billy the Kid. Born in Alabama in 1850, Patrick Floyd Garrett grew up on farms before drifting west as a young man. He worked as a cowboy and buffalo hunter before turning to law enforcement. By the late 1870s, Garrett found himself in New Mexico, right in the middle of the Lincoln County War, the same bloody feud that made Billy the Kid a legend. In 1880, Garrett was elected sheriff of Lincoln County. Almost immediately, he was tasked with capturing Billy, who had slipped away from jails and posses more than once. Unlike other lawmen, Garrett was determined, patient, and well-connected. He knew the land and the people, giving him an advantage. The hunt ended in 1881 at Fort Sumner. Garrett surprised Billy in the dark, shooting him dead with a single shot. The outlaw was only 21, and Garrett became both praised and criticized for his deed. Some saw him as the man who ended a reign of terror, others saw him as a traitor who ambushed a young legend. Afterward, Garrett wrote a book about the kid, hoping to set the record straight. But fame didn't bring him fortune. He struggled with debts and business failures. Even his reputation suffered, as some accused him of being more opportunist than hero. In 1908, Garrett himself met a violent end, shot, and killed on a remote New Mexico road. The killer was never firmly punished, and theories swirled around land disputes and old enemies. Why is Pat Garrett remembered? Because he symbolized the hard choice of the frontier, upholding the law even when it meant killing someone who had already become a legend. Bat Masterson. How does a buffalo hunter turn into a sheriff, gambler, and later a New York sports writer? That unlikely journey belonged to Bartholomew Bat Masterson. Born in Canada in 1853, Masterson moved with his family to Kansas. As a young man, he worked on the plains hunting buffalo, where he sharpened both his shooting skills and his toughness. By the time he was in his 20s, he was already known for his coolness under fire. Masterson earned his first taste of fame during a frontier skirmish in which he killed a man in self-defense. Soon, he was elected sheriff of Ford County, Kansas, where Dodge City was the heart of Cattletown chaos. As sheriff, Bat proved himself steady and fair, though quick to draw when needed. His reputation grew as both lawman and gambler, walking the line between order and vice. He also rubbed shoulders with other legends like Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday, joining in the rough brotherhood of men who carried badges by day and played cards by night. Stories of his calm demeanor during gunfights made him popular, though he never had the reckless thirst for blood some gunfighters carried. By the 1880s, Masterson drifted away from law work, focusing more on gambling and business. Eventually, he moved east, a surprising turn for a frontier lawman. In New York, he became a well-known sports writer, covering boxing matches and mixing with city society. He died in 1921 at his desk, pen in hand. From buffalo ranges to newspaper columns, His life spanned both the raw frontier and the modern city. Why does Bat Masterson remain a legend? Because he showed the West wasn't just about killing. It was about adapting, surviving, and even thriving far from the dusty streets of Dodge. Black Bart. What kind of outlaw robs stagecoaches, never harms passengers, and leaves behind mocking poems? That was Charles E. Bowles, known as Black Bart, the gentleman bandit. Born in England in 1829, Bowles came to America as a child and fought in the Civil War. Afterward, he turned to mining but grew bitter after disputes with powerful mining companies. Seeking revenge against the wealthy, he reinvented himself as Black Bart. From 1877 to 1883, Bart terrorized Wells Fargo stagecoaches in California. But unlike other bandits, he had style. He wore a flour sack with eye holes, carried a shotgun he rarely fired, and spoke politely to his victims. Witnesses said he often reassured passengers, taking only the company's strongbox and leaving them unharmed. What made him famous were the poems. Twice, after successful robberies, he left behind verses taunting Wells Fargo. One read like a rhyme of defiance, mocking the very men chasing him. It was outlawry with a literary twist, and the newspapers loved it. For years, Wells Fargo detectives chased him with no luck. His downfall came in 1883 when he left behind a handkerchief with a laundry mark. That small clue led to his arrest in San Francisco. Sentenced to prison, he served 4 years before being released. After his release, he vanished from history. Some said he tried to live quietly. Others claim he disappeared back into the frontier. Why does Black Bart endure as a legend? Because he broke the mold of the violent outlaw. He was clever, witty, and strangely courteous, turning crime into theater and leaving behind a story that still entertains today. John Wesley Hardin. Can a man be both brilliant and brutal, feared for his temper and admired for his nerve? That was John Wesley Hardin, one of the deadliest gunfighters of the Old West. Born in Texas in 1853, Hardin was the son of a preacher. Yet by the age of 15, he had already killed his first man. From there, his reputation grew with frightening speed. He claimed to have killed more than 40 men, though historians believe the true number was lower. Still, his violent streak was undeniable. Hardin's temper and quick draw made him notorious across Texas. He shot men in barrooms, on streets, and even once, according to legend, because their snoring annoyed him. Whether all tales were true or not, they painted a picture of a man who lived by the gun. But Hardin wasn't just a killer. He was also known for his intelligence. While in prison later in life, he studied law and became an attorney. This strange mix, outlaw and scholar, added to his mystique. His most famous downfall came in 1877, when Texas Rangers finally captured him after years on the run. Sentenced to 25 years, he served about 16 before gaining release. Trying to live a quieter life, he practiced law in El Paso. But trouble followed him still. In 1895, during a saloon dispute, Hardin was shot in the back of the head by John Selman, ending his violent journey at age 42. Why is Hardin remembered? Because he symbolized the raw, uncontrollable violence of the West, proof that brilliance and bloodshed could live in the same man, and that even the deadliest gunfighter could not escape his own fate. Base Reeves. Could the greatest lawman of the frontier have been a man born into slavery? That is the story of Base Reeves, a U.S. Marshal whose life sounds almost too heroic to be real. Born in Arkansas in 1838, Reeves grew up enslaved but escaped during the Civil War, finding refuge in Indian Territory. There he learned native languages, mastered tracking, and became an expert with firearms. After the war, he was recruited as a deputy U.S. Marshal, one of the first black men to hold such a role west of the Mississippi. For over 30 years, Reeves patrolled the dangerous Indian Territory, an area crawling with fugitives. He was fearless and relentless. By the end of his career, he had arrested more than 3,000 criminals, bringing them in alive whenever possible. His reputation for fairness was as strong as his skill with a gun. Reeves was known for disguises. He would pose as a farmer, a cowboy, or even an outlaw himself to trick fugitives into capture. He was also known for his strict honesty. Once, he arrested his own son for murder, refusing to bend the law even for family. Some historians believe Base Reeves inspired the fictional Lone Ranger, with his mask, his tracking skills, and his unshakable sense of justice. Whether true or not, the comparison shows how deeply his legend has echoed. Reeves retired in 1907 and died 2 years later, leaving behind a legacy unmatched by most lawmen. Why does Bass Reeves stand out? Because he proved that true justice didn't depend on race or background. His story is one of courage, discipline, and a relentless pursuit of the law in the most lawless land. Kit Carson. How does a quiet frontiersman become one of the most famous scouts in American history? That is the tale of Christopher Kit Carson. Born in Kentucky in 1809, Carson grew up on the Missouri frontier. He never had formal schooling, but he had something more valuable for his time: wilderness skills. By his teens, he was working as a trapper and mountain man, roaming across vast, untamed lands. Carson gained fame guiding explorers like John C. Fremont through the Rocky Mountains and into California. His ability to navigate rivers, deserts, and hostile territory made him essential to the westward expansion. He became the trusted scout of soldiers, settlers, and politicians alike. But Carson's life was not just about exploration. He also served as an Indian agent and soldier. During the Civil War, he commanded Union troops in the West. His campaigns against native tribes, particularly the Navajo, remain controversial, remembered for both tactical success and the suffering they caused. Despite the harshness of his role, Carson was widely respected. He was modest, preferring action over fame. Yet dime novels turned him into a hero, exaggerating his deeds and making him a household name across America. In his later years, Carson settled in Colorado, where he worked as a rancher. He died in 1868, just months after his wife, his life closing quietly compared to the wild adventures of his youth. Why does Kit Carson's name still live on? Because he embodied the spirit of the frontier: courage, skill, and resilience. Whether guiding expeditions or fighting battles, he was the man others depended on when the wilderness seemed impossible.